How to begin. How to start. The dog. The dog. The dog. The cat. It was now lunchtime, and they were all sitting under the double green fly of the dining tent, pretending that nothing had happened. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. Rodeo night in a hot little oaky town, and Diamond Feltz was inside a metal chute a long way from the scratch on Wyoming dirt he named his home, sitting on the back of Bull 82N, a loose-skinned, brindle Brahma cross identified in the program as Little Kisses. We've talked about beginnings a little bit this semester, back when we were talking about plot. I gave you a couple of tips. One was to start as close to the end as possible, and the other we took from Chekhov, which was to begin in the middle of things. I think those are both sound pieces of advice. But really, that's only the beginning of how we can think about beginnings. This, for example, from the writer Rick DeMarinis, who said, "A story's opening should give us the sense that something has happened, and that now something new is about to happen." So how did he do following his own advice in his story, The Monkey's Tale, which was published by Towson University's literary journal, Grub Street, several years ago? Rick DeMarinis is an award-winning writer. In fact, there are writing awards named for Rick DeMarinis. He's published a dozen or more books, which says you should check out Towson's literary journal. But before you do that, check out the beginning of The Monkey's Tale. The baby was born covered with hair. It looked like a tiny ape. The mother held it to her breast. "It's a gorilla," the father said. "It looks like one of those baby gorillas you see in the Bronx Zoo." There's also advice from a writer named Will Gillard in an essay he wrote called "Well Begun is Half Done." The implication being, if you get the beginning right, you're kind of halfway done with your story. The other implication being, half the work is getting the beginning right. And he picks out 4 qualities that he says go into a good short story's opening. Here are those qualities. 1, a strong voice. A story will open with a very strong voice. 2, it'll create tension or conflict. 3, it will suggest that the story has a very limited frame. It'll be only about this one person or this one event in this one person's life. And finally, it will offer context of setting or character. When we say strong voice, we mean a couple of things. The first is that the voice itself is strong. It comes with authority. When you're going to write an opening, for example, that has a guy wake up in bed and he's a bug, you've got to come strong. Voice can also mean simply that the voice is interesting, that it's unique, that it offers you phrases and ways of thinking about language that are surprising and delightful. Consider again that beginning from Annie Proulx's short story from the book Close Range, The Mud Below. Look at that, right? Listen to it. The scratch on Wyoming dirt he named as home. What great phrasing. Rodeo night in a hot little oaky town. Hot little oaky town. She's pulling you in with the strong voice. Creates tension or sets up conflict. Oh my gosh, you can probably listen to any of those openings again and find tension and conflict. And it doesn't always have to be that there are guns blazing right at the opening, right? That Hemingway, for example. Or the one from Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried on the Rainy River. This is one story I've never told before, not to anyone, not to my parents, not to my brother or sister, not even to my wife. To go into it, I've always thought, would only cause embarrassment for all of us. A sudden need to be elsewhere, which is the natural response to a confession. Even now, I'll admit, the story makes me squirm. He's never told the story before. It makes him squirm. He's never even told his wife. And now he's going to tell you. Wow. Tension. Conflict, right? Or consider that one from Amy Bloom's story collection, Come to Me. In the middle of the eulogy at my mother's boring and heartbreaking funeral, I began to think about calling off the wedding. August 21 did not seem like a good date. John Westcott did not seem like a good person to marry, and I couldn't see myself in the long white silk gown Mrs. Westcott had offered me. We had gotten engaged at Christmas while my mother was starting to die. She died in May, earlier than we had expected. When the minister said she was a rare spirit, full of the kind of bravery and joy which inspires others, I stared at the pale blue ceiling and thought, my mother would not have wanted me to spend my life with this man. Her mother's dead, and she's going to call off a wedding. How much tension can you take? And notice that she's calling off a wedding. She's not just breaking up with a guy. That's small potatoes, right? She's ratcheting up the emotional stakes by having it be a wedding. And I'll also say that beginning is giving us Gillard's third quality as well, that the story is going to be limited in its scope, just focusing on this particular frame. We know from that opening that this story Amy Bloom wrote, Love is Not a Pie, is going to be about the narrator's struggle to break up with her fiancé, call off the wedding, while mourning the death of her mother. Or how about those two very quick openings? Our aim was this: Alaska. Nilda was my brother's girlfriend. This is how all these stories begin. Notice how each of those gave you a very limited frame for the story. Our aim was Alaska. That's it. This story is going to be about the effort to get to Alaska. Nilda was my brother's girlfriend. This is how those stories go. This is going to be a story about Nilda and the brother. And you know that. Finally, Gillard's last characteristic, that an opening gives you details of setting or character, creates some sort of context for the story. You know this. Once upon a time, in a castle in a faraway land, a princess woke up to discover she'd been transformed into a gigantic insect. All of that's there. The opening of Star Wars. In fact, let's go back and look at Annie Proulx's opening again, From the Mud Below. Because it gives all that context, right? Rodeo cowboy, in the chute, on top of the bull. Everything's about to blow up. Because that's what happens when they open the chute and the bull tries to throw you. So let's look at that one. It's really brilliant, isn't it? It gives you the context. It creates tension. It's got a strong voice. And it suggests that the story is going to be limited in its scope. Just about this cowboy during his rodeo career. But even more, I mean, the details that are there. And the killer final detail, that the bull's name is Little Kisses. That's good stuff. So you might have noticed in the syllabus that I didn't give you any new stories to read this week. What I ask you to do is go back and look at all the openings of every story we've read so far. So make yourself a list. Everything from The Wig and Brought to You By, to the stuff in our book, to the Area short stories I posted, Welcome to the Water Museum, Amapola, everything. Take a look at all those beginnings and decide which ones you think are the best ones, and given the context of what we've just discussed, why you think they're the best ones. And I want you to do this because on Thursday, I'll put you in breakout rooms and you can talk with each other about which beginnings you thought were good, were the best, and why. And I'm not even going to tell you how to define beginning in this case. It could be that the beginning is only one sentence for you of one story. Or it could be that you have to go, a paragraph in for it to be considered the beginning. That's okay. Whatever you decide. But which are the best beginnings and why? And then what will this mean for you as a writer? Well, I think it means that it's time for you, now that you've gotten through the end of your story, you sort of know where it's going. I think it's time for you to consider how you begin. And I mean that both strategically. Is this the best place to start the story? Is this the way I want to hook my reader? Is this how I'm going to set up the situation? Do I have some conflict to get started? But also to think about the language of your opening. Is my voice strong enough? How can I make it more interesting? How can I ratchet up the tension without being ridiculous? I mean, remember again, Hemingway's opening. There's so much tension in it. And nothing is happening, right? Or the openings that begin, I have a secret to tell you, right? All of this you can borrow. If it works for your story, use it. Get started on your beginnings.